This is a reading from the Mystical City of God, the Coronation, by Venerable Mary of Agreda. Chapter 8 of Volume 4. Explanation of the miracle through which the sacramental species were preserved in the Most Blessed Mary from one communion to the next, the manner of its operation after she came down to the Church from heaven. 118. Until now, I have only very slightly touched upon the miracle mentioned in the above heading, and in order that so great a miracle of the Lord in favor of his most loving mother may not be without the special mention demanded by our piety, I have reserved it for this chapter. My own limited powers of explanation grieve me, for not only am I ignorant of infinitely more than what I perceive concerning it, but even what I know I can describe only in most unsatisfactory and inadequate terms, and by language falling far short of my conceptions. Nevertheless, I dare not pass over in silence the benefits conferred upon our great Queen by the right hand of her divine Son, after she had ascended from heaven to take charge of his church on earth. For if they were great and ineffable before that time, they now increased in eminent variety and exhibited at the same time the infinite power of him who conferred them, and the immense capacity of that singular and chosen creature who received them. 119. To explain this rare and prodigious blessing, that the sacramental body of Christ and the sacred species should be preserved continually in the bosom of Mary, it is not necessary to seek for another cause than that underlying all the other favors with which God distinguished this great lady, namely, that it was his holy will and according to his infinite wisdom, by which he performs according to measure and weight all that is befitting. Wisdom, chapter 11, verse 21. Christian prudence and piety will be content to know, as a reason, that God had singled this mere creature out to be his natural mother, and that therefore she alone of all creatures deserved this distinction. As this miracle of her mothership was unique and without parallel, it would be shameful ignorance to seek proofs of what the Lord did in her by comparing it with what he did or ever will do in other souls, since Mary alone rises supereminently above the common order of all. Yet, though all this is true, the Lord nevertheless wishes that by the light of faith and by other enlightenment we seek the reasons of the propriety and equity according to which the powerful arm of the Almighty wrought these wonders in his most worthy mother, so that in them we may know and bless him in her and through her, and so that we may understand how secure our salvation, all our hope, and our lot are in the hands of that powerful Queen toward whom her Son has directed all the excess of his love. In accordance with these truths, I will explain what has been made known to me of this mystery. 120. The Heavenly Mother lived 33 years in the company of her Son and true God, and from the time when he was born of her virginal womb, she never left him to the time of his death on the cross. She nursed him, served him, followed him, and imitated him, conducting herself always as a mother, daughter, and spouse, as a most faithful servant and friend. She enjoyed the sight of him, his conversation, his doctrine, and the favors which by all these meritorious services she attained in this mortal life. Christ ascended into heaven, and the force of love and right reason demanded that he should take to heaven with him his most loving mother, in order that he should not be deprived of her there, nor she in this world of his presence and company. But the most ardent love which both of them had for men dissolved in a manner these bonds of union, inducing our kindest mother to return to the world in order to establish the church, and moving the Son to give his consent to her absence from him during that time. But as the Son of God was powerful enough to recompense her for this privation to a certain extent, it became for him an obligation of his love to make such a recompense, and the fulfillment of this obligation would not have been so publicly acknowledged or made so manifest if he denied his Blessed Mother the favor of accompanying her upon earth, while he remained seated at the glory of the right hand of his Father. Besides, the most ardent love of the Blessed Mother, having been accustomed and nourished in the presence of the Lord her Son, would have inflicted upon her insufferable violence if for so many years she was to be deprived of that kind of presence of him, which was possible during her stay in the church. 121. For all this, the Lord our Savior provided by continuing his sacramental presence in the heart of the most fortunate mother as long as she lived in the church after his taking seat in heaven. To a certain extent, He abundantly recompensed her by this sacramental presence for that which she had enjoyed when he had yet lived with her in this world. For in those times he often absented himself in order to attend to the work of our salvation, and thus afflicted her heart with anxieties and fears, roused by the works in which she had to engage. And even when he returned, he could not remain always in her company, and when this was possible, his very presence filled her mind with the terrors of his coming passion and death on the cross. This sorrow sometimes cast a shadow on the joy of her possessing him and attending upon him. But when he was established at the right hand of his eternal Father, having sustained the torment of his passion, and when this, her same Lord and Son, took his rest sacramentally in her virginal bosom, then the Heavenly Mother enjoyed his presence without fear or disturbance. In the Son, she continually enjoyed the presence of the entire Trinity by that manner of vision which I have described before. Thus was fulfilled and realized literally what this great Queen says in the Canticles: I shall hold him, and will not leave him until I bring him to the house of my mother, the Church. There I will give him to drink of the spiced wine and of the juice of my pomegranates. Canticle chapter 8, verse 2. 122. In this blessing the Lord fulfilled his promise made to the Church in his apostles, that he should be with them to the end of time. Matthew chapter 28, verse 20. He had already anticipated the fulfillment of this promise, even at that time, when he resolved to ascend into heaven, for he had remained sacramentally present in his mother since the Last Supper, as related above, but it would not have been entirely fulfilled after his ascension if he had not wrought this new miracle in the Church. For in those first years the apostles had no temple or proper arrangement for preserving continually the sacred Eucharist, and therefore they always consumed it entirely on the day of its consecration. The Most Holy Mary alone was the sanctuary and the temple, in which for some years the Most Blessed Sacrament was preserved, in order that the Church of Christ might not be deprived even for one moment of the Word made flesh. From the time when he ascended into heaven until the end of the world, although he was not there present in that tabernacle for the use of the faithful, yet he was there for their benefit and for other more glorious ends. Since the great Queen offered up her prayers and intercessions for all Christians in the temple of her own heart, and she adored the sacramental Christ in the name of the whole Church, while by his indwelling in that virginal bosom Christ was present and united to the mystical body of the faithful. Above all, this great lady was the cause of that age's being supremely fortunate, for by thus sheltering within her bosom her sacramental Son and God, just as he is now harbored within the sanctuaries and tabernacles, he was continually adored with highest reverence and piety by the most blessed Mary, and was never offended, as he is now in our churches. In Mary, he was satiated with the delights which he desired to enjoy for the eternal ages among the children of men. Proverbs chapter 8, verse 31. And since all the assistance rendered to the Church was rendered with these delights as an object, the Lord could not have gained this end more fully than by remaining sacramentally present in the heart of his purest mother. She was the most legitimate sphere of the divinity, and as it were the proper element and the focusing point of its proper activity, and all the other creatures outside of the heavenly Mary were in comparison with her foreign to it, since this conflagration of divine love, which continues to burn with infinite charity, found no room or element for its flames. 123. From the understanding which has been given me of the mystery of the love of Christ the Lord for his most holy mother, and of the force with which he was drawn toward her, I would go so far as to say that if he had not found this way of remaining with her in the sacramental species, he would have come down from the right hand of the Father to the world in order to render companionship to his mother while she sojourned with his Church. And if it had been necessary that the heavenly mansions and the celestial courtiers should be deprived of the presence of the most sacred humanity from that time, he would have considered that of less importance than to be deprived of the company of his mother. It is no exaggeration to say this, when we all must confess that in the purest Mary, the Lord found a correspondence and a degree of love more conformable to his will than in all the blessed combined. And consequently, his own love for her exceeded his love for all others. If the shepherd of the gospel leaves the 99 sheep in order to go in search of only one that is lost, and if we nevertheless dare not save him, that he leaves the greater for the less, it should not cause wonder in us that this divine shepherd should leave all the rest of the saints in order to be in the company of his most sincere sheep, who clothed him with her own nature, and raised and nourished him as a mother. Without a doubt, the eyes of his beloved spouse and mother would attract him in swiftest flight from those heights, Canticle chapter 6, verse 4, to that earth where he had lived, whither he had before this come for the salvation of the children of Adam, toward whom he was less attracted, yea, rather repelled by their sins and by the necessity of suffering for them. If now he descended to live with his beloved mother, it would not be to suffer and die, but to enjoy the delights of her company. Fortunately, it was not necessary to rob heaven of his presence, since by descending in sacramental form he could satisfy both his own love and that of his most blessed mother, in whose heart, as in his couch, this true Solomon could take up his rest without leaving the right hand of his eternal Father. Canticle chapter 3, verse 7. 124. The manner of operating this miracle was as follows. At the communion of the Most Blessed Mary, the sacramental species, instead of entering the portion of the stomach where the natural food is commingled and rarefied, and instead of being mixed up or digested with even the little nourishment sometimes taken by the great lady, halted on their passage and lodged within the heart of Mary, as if in repayment of the blood which it had given up at the incarnation of the Word, and from which was formed the sacred humanity for hypostatical union with the Word, as has been explained in the second part. The participation in the Holy Eucharist is called an extension of the Incarnation, and therefore it was proper that the Blessed Mother should share in this participation in a new and singular manner, since she also concurred in the incarnation of the Word in a miraculous and extraordinary manner. 125. The heat of the heart in a perfectly healthy being is very great, and in man it is certainly not the less on account of his greater excellence and nobility of nature, and of his prolonged life and activity, and the providence of nature supplies it with air and ventilation for its refreshment, and for moderating that heat, which is the source of all the other animal warmth. Yet, though in the noble constitution of our Queen the ardors of her heart were intense, and though the affections and operations of her inflamed love still more increased them, nevertheless, the sacred species, while lodged in her heart, were not changed or consumed. Moreover, although multiplied miracles were required in order to preserve them, they are not to be attributed sparingly in this singular being, a creature who is altogether a prodigy and a summary of wonders. This favor began at the first communion, and through the preservation of the species continued until the second communion received at the hands of St. Peter on the octave of Pentecost. Then, as the new species took their place in her heart, the former ones were consumed. By this miraculous exchange, the previous sacramental species continued to yield their place to those she received in her communions until the end of her life, so that she was never deprived of the presence of her Son and God in sacramental form. 126. Through this privilege and that of the continual and abstractive vision of the divinity mentioned before, the Most Blessed Mary was made so godlike, and her operations and faculties were raised so far above human conception, that it will be impossible to understand them in this mortal life, or to attain of them a proportionate idea, as is possible for us concerning other things. Nor can I find words to explain the little which could be made clear to me. After she returned from heaven, she was entirely renewed and transformed in regard to the use of her senses. For on the one hand, she was absent from her divine Son, in whom she had worthily employed them, when he was sensibly present. On the other hand, she felt and perceived him resting in her heart, whereon all her attention was centered. From the day on which she descended, she made a new treaty with her eyes, and exercised a new dominion and sway over them, of not permitting any terrestrial and visible images to enter except those that were necessary for the government of the Church and for the discharge of her duties. She made no use of these images, nor were they necessary to her for conversing or meditating interiorly, and they were merely stored in her memory and understanding. Her interior meditations and contemplations were actuated by infused images and by the science connected with the abstract vision of the divinity, after the manner in which the saints know and see in God, or through vision or knowledge of the creatures in themselves. In this manner, our Queen understood the will of God in all her works, and she did not make use of her sight in knowing or learning any of these things, although she used her eyes to see where she was going or with whom she was conversing in all the sincerity of heart. 127. The sense of hearing she made use of somewhat more frequently, for it was necessary to listen to the faithful and to the apostles in what they reported of the state of souls, of the church, and of its needs and spiritual advancement, in order to answer them and give them her instruction and counsels. But she governed her sense of hearing so completely that it was affected by no sound or word which disagreed in the least with the holiness and perfection of her state, or which were not necessary for the advance of charity toward her fellow men. Of her sense of smell she made no use for terrestrial orders, or of the common objects of that sense, but by the intervention of the angels she was regaled by the celestial perfumes, which were perceived by her in praise of the Creator. She experienced a great change also in the sense of taste, for she was made aware that after her sojourn in heaven she could live without earthly nourishment, though that was not commanded her, but left to her own free will. Therefore she ate very seldom and sparingly, and this only at times when St. Peter or St. John asked her, or in order to avoid astonishment in others at not seeing her eat. But when she thus, in obedience or in humility, tasted food, she perceived not the common taste or savor of it, so that her sense reacted not upon it in any more than if she had eaten some apparent or glorified substance. Her touch likewise conformed to this kind of change, for through it she perceived little of that which she touched, and had in it no sensible delight, but she felt the contact of the sacramental species in her heart, to which she ordinarily attended with feelings of admirable sweetness and joy. 128. All these privileges in regard to the senses were granted her at her petition, for she consecrated all of them and her faculties anew to the greater glory of the Most High, and for producing in her the plenitude of virtue, holiness, and the most eminent perfection. And though through her whole life, from the first instant of her immaculate conception, she had complied with all the requirements of a faithful servant, Matthew chapter 25, verse 20, and of a prudent dispenser of the plenitude of her graces and gifts, as appears from the whole course of this history, yet after she ascended to heaven with her Son, she was perfected in all things, and was furnished by the divine omnipotence with new faculties of operating, though she was as yet a pilgrim. Since she did not yet enjoy the beatific vision as a comprehensor, nevertheless the operations of her senses partook of, and were rather similar to those of the saints, glorified in body and soul, than to the operations of the other viators. There is no other way of comparing this state, so singular, so blessed and divine, in which our great Queen and Lady returned from heaven to govern the Holy Church. 129. To this exalted activity of the sensible faculties corresponded her interior wisdom and knowledge, for she knew the decrees of the Most High will in all that she wished and was obliged to do, in what time, in what manner, in what order and circumstance each work was to be accomplished, with what words and under what arrangements, so that in this she was not excelled even by the angels, who assist us without ever losing sight of the Lord. The great Queen practiced the virtues with such high wisdom that she excited their admiration, for they saw that no other mere creature could exceed her, or could arrive at that summit of perfection and holiness which they saw her attain. One of the things that filled her with the highest joy was the adoration and reverence exhibited by the supernal spirits to the Lord, sacramentally present in her bosom. The same was also shown by the saints whenever she ascended into heaven, bearing her most divine Son with her in her heart. And this was a sight furnishing new joy and jubilee for all the blessed. The joy of seeing the blessed sacrament thus honored by the angels was a recompense for the gross negligence of mortals in venerating the sacred body of the Lord. And as such, the Blessed Lady also offered up the worship and reverence of the celestial spirits, who knew how to estimate this mystery and venerated it without fail or negligence. 130. Sometimes the body of her Son manifested itself to her openly within her, at other times with all the beauty of his most holy humanity. At other times, and almost continually, were made known to her all the miracles contained in the most august sacrament. All these wonders and many others, which we cannot understand in this corruptible life, Most Holy Mary enjoyed, sometimes becoming manifest to her in themselves, sometimes in the abstractive vision of the divinity. And with the images of the divinity were presented to her also all that she was to do for herself and for all the church. What was most consoling to her was to perceive the joy and pleasure of her divine Son in remaining sacramentally present in her sincerest heart, which without a doubt, according to what was made known to me, was greater than to be in the company of the saints. O extraordinary, singular, and exalted privilege! Thou by thyself wert more pleasing to the Creator than the high heavens he had made for his habitation. Psalm 113, verse 16. He who cannot be contained in those illimitable spaces measured and enclosed himself in thee alone, and found a pleasant throne and resting place, not only in thy virginal womb, but in the immensity of thy capacious love. Thou alone wast a heaven from the first of thy existence, so that God lived in thee after he gave thee being, and shall rest in thee in fullest delight through all the ages of his eternity. Let all the nations know thee, for in thee they know and praise their true God and Redeemer, since through thee alone he has visited us and repaired our unfortunate fall. Luke chapter 1, verse 68. 131. Who of mortals, or even of the angels, can prescribe the conflagration of love burning in the purest heart of this great queen, so full of wisdom? Who can comprehend the impetus of the river of the divinity, which inundated and absorbed this city of God? Psalm 44, verse 5. What aspirations and acts of virtue did she not enter into while exercising the measureless gifts of grace showered upon her? What prayers and petitions did she not send forth for the Holy Church? What entrancements of love for us did not overwhelm her? What gifts did she not merit and obtain for us? Only the author of this prodigy could know them. But let us on our own part raise our hopes, enliven our faith, and incite our love and union with this kind mother. Let us solicit her intercession and assistance, since he, who is her son and our brother, will deny nothing to her whom he has so singled out for his love, as I have described and will describe further on. Instruction which the Queen of the Angels, Most Holy Mary, gave me. 132. My daughter, thou hast so far been well informed of my life and activity, considering that thou art a mere creature. Besides me there is no other created being which thou canst better use as thy model and original for thy greater holiness and perfection. But now thou hast entered upon the description of the supreme state of virtue reached by me in mortal life. This favor should oblige thee to renew thy desires and direct all the attention of thy faculties toward the perfect imitation of all that I teach thee. It is time, my dearest, and there is reason, that thou deliver thyself entirely over to my will in what I seek of thee, in order that thou mayest animate thyself to the attainment of this blessing. I wish thee to take notice that though the species of the sacrament are consumed, my divine Son, whenever souls receive him with reverence and fervor, and prepare for him a pure and ardent heart, remains with them with special graces by which he assists them, enriches, and directs them in return for their hospitality. Few are the souls who partake of this blessing, because many, knowing of it, approach the Holy Sacrament without the proper disposition, as if by haphazard or habit, and without being solicitous for the reverence and holy fear due to it. But as thou art now informed of this secret, I desire that, since by the orders of thy superiors thou receivest it every day, thou prepare thyself worthily each time, and thus partake of this great blessing. 133. For this end thou must avail thyself of the remembrance of what I did, and by it regulate thy aspirations, thy fervor, thy love, and all that is necessary to prepare thy heart as a temple and habitation of thy spouse and highest King. Labor, then, to collect all thy powers within thyself. Before and after receiving, observe all that pertains to the fidelity of a spouse, and especially must thou place a guard over thy eyes and a watch over all thy senses, in order that no profane or foreign image may enter into the temple of the Lord. Keep thy heart entirely pure and unspotted, for when it is impure or preoccupied, the plenitude of divine light and wisdom cannot enter. Wisdom chapter 1, verse 4. All this thou wilt know from what God has shown thee, if thou hast attended to it with an upright motive. Even supposing that thou canst not exempt thyself from all intercourse with creatures, it is befitting that thou should hold thy senses in greater subjection, and that thou do not permit them to introduce the image of any sensible thing by which thou wouldst not be assisted in striving after the most holy and pure of virtue. Separate the precious from the worthless, the truth from deceit, in order that thou mayest imitate me perfectly. I wish that from now on thou attend to the choice thou art to make in all things, great or small, so that thou err in none, perverting the order of divine light. 134. Consider attentively the common deception of mortals and the woeful damage they suffer. For in the decisions of their will, they ordinarily are moved solely by what they perceive through the senses, and they immediately proceed to act upon their choice without further consideration or counsel. Since the sensible impressions immediately move the animal passions and inclinations, it is evident that men do not act according to right reason, but according to the impulse of passion, excited by the senses and their objects. Hence, he that considers only the injury and pain caused is straightway moved to vengeance. He that follows only his hankering after strange property, as soon as he lays his eyes upon it, is impelled to injustice. In the same manner act so many unfortunates who follow the concupiscence of the eyes, the movements of the flesh, and the pride of life, because these are the only things offered by the world and the devil. In their blind deception, they follow darkness as their light, taste the bitter as sweet, take deadly poison for remedy of their souls, and hold that for wisdom which is nothing but diabolical and earthly ignorance. Do thou guard thyself against these pernicious errors, and never resolve on anything, or govern thyself by anything that is merely sensible, or arising from sensible impressions, nor pursue the advantages held out through them. In thy actions take counsel first of all from the interior knowledge and light communicated to thee by God, in order that thou mayest not go blindly forward, and he shall always grant thee sufficient guidance. Immediately seek the advice of thy superiors and teachers, if thou canst do so, before making thy choice. And if thy superior or teacher is not at hand, seek counsel of others, even inferiors, for this is more secure than to follow thy own will, which may be disturbed and blinded by passion. This is the rule to be followed, especially in the exterior works, pursuing them with recollection, with secrecy, and according to the demands of circumstances and fraternal charity as they occur. In all of them it is necessary not to lose out of sight the north star of interior light, while moving in the profound gulf of the intercourse with creatures, where there is continual danger of perishing.